And Indiana has done it. Their first ever Commissioner's Cup championship, knocking off.
What happens when the WNBA's most watched rookie can't even pull on a jersey? A veteran teammate ghosts the locker room, and Vegas bookmakers have already carved your tombstone before tip-off. That's exactly where the Indiana Fever found themselves in the 2025 Commissioner's Cup final. Caitlin Clark, the league's biggest draw, was shut down by a stubborn groin strain, her fourth straight game in street clothes. DeWanna Bonner, the high-priced veteran signed for leadership, had just forced her way off the roster with a cryptic Twitter post that left teammates fuming. And on the other side of the floor stood the Minnesota Lynx, reigning Cup champions, 14-point favorites, and owners of the best record in basketball. Sports networks were so sure of the script that ESPN pre-scheduled a postgame segment titled Lynx Dominate Fever. Instead, Indiana wrote a different ending, one carved out of grit, desperation, and a little righteous anger. By the time the confetti settled on Target Center's hardwood, the underdogs were hoisting their first trophy since 2012. Natasha Howard was chanting MVP, and Clark's 6 locker room words, "Everybody in the league is sick," set social media ablaze. But to understand why that sentence sent a chill through every rival front office, we have to rewind to the moment the Fever's season looked ready to snap in half. Caitlin Clark's absence was more than a gap on the depth chart. It was an identity crisis. In 3 of the previous 5 games without her, the Fever squandered double-digit leads, their one's electric pace grinding into half-court purgatory. Coaches could see possessions die to passes early. No kickouts, no relocation, just contested jumpers that clanged off iron. Opponents smelled blood. Box-and-one traps that had been suicide against Clark suddenly worked, funneling all the pressure onto Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston. Then came DeWanna Bonner's abrupt exit. The front office had chased her championship rings and her locker room pedigree only to watch her bail after 9 games, waving goodbye through a max contract paycheck. The message to a young roster already straining under expectations felt brutal. If things get rocky, veterans can just walk. Even depth staples were missing. Forward, Damiris Dantas was 4,000 miles away on FIBA duty, and Clark's backup point guard, Erica Wheeler, nursed a sore knee. Vegas didn't need clairvoyance to slap a 2-touchdown spread on the matchup. Analysts piled on. One ESPN pundit called it a mercy killing in high definition. Another claimed the Fever had no business boarding the plane, and in perhaps the most embarrassing moment of premature celebration, ESPN's production crew pushed the now infamous Lynx Dominate Fever YouTube card hours before tip-off. Yet rookie head coach Stephanie White refused to let the narrative calcify. She walked into shoot-around wearing a t-shirt that read, "Pressure is a privilege," and kept repeating the phrase during pre-game media hits, stressing that adversity merely spotlights character. The slogan would become a rallying cry, but first, her players needed to believe it. In the bowels of Target Center, the Fever's makeshift starting 5 circled up. There were no fiery speeches about destiny, just a blunt checklist from White. Defend at the point of attack. Feed Boston early. Run Mitchell off dribble handoffs until the Lynx switched themselves dizzy. Kelsey Mitchell, usually the team's first voice, surprised everyone by speaking last. "We're already dead in their eyes," she told the room, "so let's play like we don't feel pain." Aaliyah Boston slapped the whiteboard so hard it rattled. Natasha Howard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the team's skid, simply nodded and pulled on her shooting sleeve. Their eyes weren't wide with fear. They flashed something wilder: opportunity. White's final instruction was surgical: stack days. One game wasn't going to erase Clark's injury timeline or the swirl of Bonner gossip, but string enough perfect possessions together and you could at least change tonight. The players burst onto the court as if someone had cut a wire holding them back, and from the opening tip, they attacked. 45 seconds in, Kelsey Mitchell turned down a ball screen, crossed over at full throttle, and kissed a layup high off the glass, Indiana's first lead. 30 seconds later, she came off a ghost screen, rose from 26 feet, and buried a 3 so pure the net barely twitched. The Lynx crowd gasped. Mitchell just backpedaled, whispering "let's run" at her teammates. Her quick trigger confidence rewired the Fever's offense. Defenders pinched in, terrified of another pull-up bomb, and suddenly the weak side corner opened like a trapdoor. Lexi Hull snuck behind a staring defender for an easy reverse. Ari McDonald, newly re-signed after a midseason hiatus, flew past a scrambling help defender for a driving end. Indiana's first quarter tally read 24 points on 60% shooting. Meanwhile, on defense, the Fever swarmed Nafisa Collier every time she touched the ball, forcing 3 early turnovers. Guards fronted passing lanes. Boston sagged just far enough to bait the entry feed before slapping it away. The Lynx rhythm that had seemed machine perfect on film now stuttered like a scratched record. You could sense a collective eyebrow raise inside the arena. Underdogs weren't supposed to throw the first haymaker, but Indiana didn't just throw it. They connected flush. The second quarter belonged to the bigs. Aaliyah Boston, stymied in recent games by poor entry passing, finally got fed in her sweet spots. On consecutive trips, she sealed deep in the lane, called for the rock with both hands like an NFL tight end, and spun baseline for easy finishes. With each bucket, she pounded her chest, the frustration of previous weeks melting into raw adrenaline. But the game's axis tilted when Natasha Howard decided to play like 2019 DPOY. Natasha Howard, midway through the frame, she slid into a passing lane, picked off a lazy swing pass intended for Collier, and raced coast to coast for a layup. Next possession, she drilled a step-through banker, drawing Collier's second foul. On the Fever bench, injured Clark leaped so high, you worried about her groin just watching. Howard closed the half with 10 points, 7 boards, and a that forced the broadcast crew to rewrite their halftime narrative on the fly. She bullied the glass, hit all 8 of her free throws, and shouted instructions even while backpedaling on defense. By the night's end, her 16-12 rebound for wrist to two-style masterpiece secured unanimous Cup MVP honors. Collier, the MVP frontrunner, gamely answered with mid-range jumpers, but never looked comfortable. Whenever she set a high screen, Howard blitzed her hands so active that the ball changed sides of the floor almost in subtle defense. The Lynx star finished with 5 turnovers and just 14 points, her lowest total in a month. By halftime, the scoreboard read Fever 38, Lynx 31. Target Center buzzed with nervous chatter. Suddenly, the so-called mismatch looked like a brawl, and Indiana's belief was no longer fragile, it was weaponized. Great upsets need unsung heroes, and the Fever's bench responded like they'd been waiting for this audition. Sophie Cunningham, who had been ice-cold over the previous fortnight, drained back-to-back threes less than 90 seconds apart, each one accompanied by a celebratory skip that drove Lynx defenders to distraction. Her 13 points came at moments when momentum teetered. Lexi Hall, forever labeled glue player, morphed into epoxy. She ripped down 7 rebounds, including 2 in traffic over taller forwards, and her three-pointer to beat the third quarter. Buzzer twisted the dagger another inch, and then there was Ari McDonald, signed only days earlier. She logged 12 points, and a pair of shot clock buzzer daggers that forced Minnesota's bench to rise in hurried timeouts. Every time the Lynx threatened, McDonald's blow-by speed either earned free throws or collapsed the defense for a kick-out triple. Indiana's offense, once criticized for hero ball, was suddenly symphonic. 5 players in double figures, 20 assists on 28 made buckets. As the fourth quarter dawned, the Fever clung to an 11-point edge, but Minnesota's crowd stirred, their chants swelling into a roar. It was the first true gut check of the night, and the next 2 minutes would decide whether Cinderella stayed at the ball or turned back into a pumpkin. The Lynx opened the final frame with a quick 7-0 jab, slicing the deficit to 4 and blowing the roof off the arena. Coach White burned a timeout so fast the official barely finished signaling the bucket. In the huddle, she didn't redraw schemes, she issued a dare: win the next 3 possessions. Out of the break, Boston ducked into the post, powered through a double, and kissed a soft hook off glass. Next trip, Howard deflected a high-low attempt, dove on the loose ball, and flicked ahead to McDonald for a sprint-out layup. Third possession, Mitchell wove through a stagger screen, rose for a foul line jumper, and buried it as Collier lunged late. 9 unanswered points. What had been a 4-point scare ballooned back to 13, and Target Center fell eerily quiet. From there, the defense squeezed like a vice. Minnesota managed just 2 field goals in the final 6 minutes, shooting an icy 34.9% for the game, and scoring only 39 points across the last 3 quarters. Whenever Collier caught on the block, a second defender slid over before she even pivoted. Skip passes sailed high, dribblers found their lanes swallowed, and Howard's hands seemed to spawn from everywhere at once. With 38 seconds left, Mitchell dribbled out the clock near midcourt, grinning at teammates as the realization hit. Indiana hadn't merely survived, they'd dominated. Final score, Fever 74, Lynx 59. Cameras hustled into the locker room, expecting the usual champagne cliches. Instead, they captured a scene equal parts victory parade and family reunion. Clark, clad in warm-ups, accepted the cup from an equipment manager, tipped it like a giant chalice, and shouted over the music, "Everybody in the league is sick." Laughter morphed into a booming chorus of MVP for Howard, but the 6 words had already detonated on social media. Fans recognized the subtext instantly: jealousy. All year, rival crowds had booed Clark's every dribble, players had bristled at her TV spotlight, and pundits had debated whether the hype was good for the game. Now the Fever's sideline superstar had fired back without dropping a single stat. ESPN scrambled to pull down its doomed Lynx Dominate thumbnail, while Twitter's X lit up with memes of fake prescriptions for feveritis. Within an hour, the locker room clip outperformed highlights from 2 NBA Summer League games combined. The message landed: Indiana relished the villain role and, more importantly, had depth to match its bravado. Strip away the confetti, and you're left with cold numbers that should terrify the rest of the league. Indiana is 8-8, despite missing its franchise cornerstone for 9 total games. Bonner's departure frees roughly $150 K in cap space for GM Lynn Dunn to pursue a veteran sharpshooter at the deadline. Rumors already linked the Fever to Chicago's Marina Mabry, and Clark's imminent return could make Indianapolis a destination rather than a rebuild. More vital than trades is confidence. Boston rediscovered her dominance. Howard proved she can be the closer. Mitchell showed she's more than a microwave scorer. She's a tone setter. Role players know their roles actually matter. And Coach White's stack days mantra just earned the receipts to back it. Project. The timeline. deadline. Clark rehabs 2 more games, rejoins a roster that now believes it can win without her. Opposing defenses can't blitz her without leaving double-digit scorers unattended. Imagine transition threes off Clark's hit-ahead passes. Boston carving single coverage. Howard freelancing on the weak side for steals. Suddenly, an 8-8 record looks less middling and more like a launching pad. The Fever haven't raised a championship banner since Tamika Catchings roamed the hardwood. Tuesday night's cup won't count in the official championship ledger, but it injected something just as precious, unshakable proof that pressure doesn't crush them in temper steel. If this game taught us anything, it's that heart and chemistry can smother even the most daunting talent gap. Indiana walked into Target Center short-handed, short-stack, and supposedly short-timed and walked out carrying silverware. Kelsey Mitchell's fearless shot-making, Aaliyah Boston's interior intelligence, Natasha Howard's throwback to way dominance, and a bench that punched above its weight combined to flip a scripted blowout into the WNBA's most shocking upset since the Cup's inception. Clark's 6-word taunt wasn't just bravado, it was prophecy. Every rival coach now has to game plan for a Fever squad that has tasted life without its superstar and liked the flavor, the jealousy narrative, fuel, the pressure, a privilege, and the road to 2025. Suddenly wide open. Drop. I've got the Fever in the comments if you're ready for the next chapter. Smash that like and hammer subscribe with notifications so you don't miss our deep dive on the impending Feverous' showdown once Clark is back in uniform. Until then, remember, in Indiana, the underdog mask just became a crown.